those of you that don't know me, my name is Vicky Nash and I'm director of the OII. And it's my huge pleasure to see you all here and see you online this afternoon for the project we're going to talk about with Dr. Fabian Stephany. An exploration into how fast-changing technologies like AI are transforming the types of skills that employers are seeking. I think many of you do know our speaker, but again, I'm not going to assume that everybody does, so just a little introduction. So Fabian's a departmental research lecturer here at the OII in the area of AI and work. He's also a research affiliate at the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society in Berlin, and also a fellow at the Brussels-based think tank, the Bruegel, I won't say Bruegel Institute, it's the think tank Bruegel, isn't it? The SkillScale project that he leads investigates the emergence of new skills and the sustainability of novel occupations in a time of technological disruption. But he's also a co-creator of something we had a little while ago, the Online Labour Observatory, which it's still going strong, isn't it? I think with the ILO, yeah, it's fantastic. So a digital data hub launched by the OII, hosted by the OII and the ILO for researchers and policymakers interested in just tracking, if you like, online platform work and labour. Little tiny bit of housekeeping. So just to make you all aware that this event is being recorded and it will be posted on the website following the event. I think in terms of timings, probably speak for what, 30, 40 minutes, something like that.
Yes, rather 40, but I'll try to
keep it brief. Good. Not brief, but no, make sure we have time for questions.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we will have time for Q&A at the end. If you're joining us online, please can you just put your questions into the Q&A box? And if you're in the room, if you can save your questions for the end and then obviously raise your hand. And those of you who are online, if you want to ask questions with your mic on, please raise your hand during the Q&A and one of us will try it and manage that whilst also concentrating on the questions. But just obviously be aware if you are on the mic that you would be included in the recording. So I think that's everything. Cool. And so just, Fabian, my huge pleasure. I'm so keen to hear where the evidence has got us. So thank you so much for doing this afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for these kind words, Vicky. We have this weird situation. There's a huge screen, which is great for the people to view what I show on the slides, but also I will be moving around. So whenever I'm standing between you and the information provided here, please just let me know and I'll move to the side. You already heard an introduction about the project, the SkillScale project that I lead. I'm happy to see Matthew here, for example, as well, who's a member of our project as well as the default student at the OII. But how did this come into being? Like, how did we come up with the idea of studying skills in times of technological change? And for this, I have a question to you before we start. So the audience is quite young, but still, I think you might all remember the financial crisis of 2008, right? Probably, yes. So Lehman Brothers insolvency, and the shockwaves afterwards, like bankruptcy of companies and potentially entire countries. So thinking about the labor market, the two most kind of vital life signs of the labor market is employment and vacancy rates. So how many people are, or unemployment and vacancy rates, how many people are looking for jobs and how many companies are looking to fill new positions. Compared to 2008, before the crisis, what do you say? Are we now, today, let's say in the European Union, are we seeing more unemployment than before the financial crisis these times, 2008, or higher vacancy rates? Like, is it more people looking for work, or is it, relatively speaking, more companies looking for workers? So who's for higher unemployment? 1, 2, 3, 4. Who's for higher vacancy rates? 1, 2, 3. So yeah, okay. So vacancy rates seem to be leading the polls here, and that's good news. So you're quite knowledgeable actually in the field, because this beautiful curve, it's a very heartwarming curve for economists. They love the beverage curve. Though for those of you who see the curve for the first time, it might be a bit weird in terms of interpretation, because we're not looking at years down here, but we're following the years along the line of the curve. This is on the horizontal axis is unemployment. These are the vacancy rates. And when we see 2008, that's the financial crisis hit, and we see the immediate reaction of the labor market, right? Like, unemployment's going up dramatically, as we can all imagine, like various reasons for this. Then it's going down, and at the same time, though, something interesting is happening. Vacancy rates have been rising, and are now, like 2023 and 24, the latest data we could get. We don't have data for 25 yet. Significantly higher, if you look at this, relatively speaking, significantly higher than they used to be before this probably biggest economic crisis that we've seen and hopefully will see in the foreseeable future. And this is particularly strong, or these effects are particularly strong for certain professions. So, for example, in the European Union, almost 2/3 of the companies small and medium-sized enterprises, so really the backbone of the economy, reported that they had severe difficulties in finding talent, particularly in the field of ICT, so information communication and telecommunication sector. And this again is not like big tech companies. This is really, you know, the bread and butter business of the economy. And many people say that this is due to something called the skill gap. And the skill gap essentially says, you know, as technology and, you know, social changes, technological changes are altering the labor market, we end up in a kind of seemingly paradoxical situation where there are people on the labor market that feel that their skills are not up to date, so they don't have the skills that allow them to, you know, apply for a new job or have good career prospects. And at the same time, and that's pretty clear looking at the vacancy rates, we also see on the company side that companies having difficulties, the numbers really show this pretty strongly, having difficulties in finding adequately skilled talent to fill their positions. And this skill mismatch or skill gap has huge implications for individuals, for the workforce, for the economy, but also for society overall. So for example, in the UK, we see that 13 million people report that they lack the essential digital skills, AI skills, but also other digital skills to essentially master the world of work, but also master their general lives, you know, like get around with bureaucracy and the internet. At the same time, the World Economic Forum estimates that 1.5 trillion US dollars could be lost in global GDP because of this mismatch between the skills of the workforce and the skills being demanded on the labor market. Just to think about the financial crisis again, this number, like more or less, you know, reliable estimates that they are on the financial crisis, was around that ballpark, 1.2 trillion US dollars. So we're looking at a tremendous economic loss due to this mismatch, and also wider implications on the societal political end. Due to, according to the latest Pew survey in the United States, 70% of the people that were worried that their skill set is out of touch, out of date with the labor market, voted for rather political extreme opinions like Donald Trump in the United States. And this is precisely one of the motivations why we started with the SkillScale Project, because we thought like, okay, if skills have such a fundamental role in the labor market, you know, in matching demand and supply, or helping to match demand and supply in times of change, we would really like to investigate what's going on. So how are requirements for skills changing? And the work that I'll be presenting here today is essentially based on 3 papers that we've been gathering over the last 1.5 to 2 years with amazing students. I'm happy to have, again, Matthew here, for example, who's one of my co-authors, but also Elena and Alejandro Eugenia, students in our SkillScale project who've been collaborating with me and working on these papers. And I'd like to, in hopefully not too rushed manner, go through these 3 papers that we've just briefly touched upon, these papers and the key insights that we gathered from it. And I'd like to begin with 2 sectors that are particularly impacted by the skill gap. And those are fields, work, jobs centered around artificial intelligence. So people who are asked to design, but not only design, but also maintain and regulate or govern AI infrastructure and algorithms, and around the greening of the economy. So this is a broad field, a broad domain, you know, from renewable energies, waste management, restoration, for example. So our institute, for example, is going to move to a new building in September, and it's known for its eco-friendly, you know, materials that have been used. So we see in many aspects of the economy, greening, sustainability, eco-friendliness has become an important part. And no surprise, in these sectors, the skill gap is the largest because there are new technologies, there are new practices emerging in the labor market, and it's really difficult to find adequately skilled talent simply because these things happen so swiftly. And so for our first paper, we've been wondering whether in these specific sectors, you know, employers have shifted to something called skill-based hiring. And that means that they're focusing more on skills, actually, in this situation of a very tight labor market, as in comparison to degrees. And hence we call this paper skills or degree, and show that skills have indeed, just to, you know, bring the message up here in front, skills have become more relevant for these 2 sectors than formal degrees. So how did we go about this? Again, this is all of these three works look at the demand side of skills, so what employers are asking for. We will, at a later part of this project, and I'll show this, I'll have the time to show this towards the end, we will also be looking at the supply side. But for now, we're looking at the demand side of it, and we're looking at a large set of online job vacancies from the UK. So these are job postings, essentially, you know, all sorts of industries, all sorts of occupations, white collar, blue collar, being covered here, and where employers over the last 5 years have been looking for talent, have been searching through the talent pool. And the idea is that for AI and green roles, they've been switching to a practice called skill-based hiring. And skill-based hiring, essentially, at least in the definition that we put up here for our paper, entails two different things. So the prevalence and also the reward for skills has been going up. So skills have become more important, like have been you know, more at the center of recruiting practices, and also the economic rewards for certain skills are higher. So the additional wages that have been offered, the premium that are offered for certain skills. And conversely, on the other hand, if it's more about skills, it's less about formal education. So the prevalence and mentioning of formal degrees and also the economic premium for formal degrees has diminished. So how do we go about this? So first of all, this chart is showing you the essential information on what is happening in these two domains compared to the rest of the labor market. So blue represents the all vacancies that relate to artificial intelligence. Green, those that relate to you know, green job or sustainable jobs, and gray is referring to any other job, the rest of the labor market, essentially. And the way that we went about this is that we used an identification that's relatively common in the field. We looked at the skills that are being demanded. So we have a huge set of AI skills and a huge set of typical green skills that have been demanded on the labor market, or that are demanded on the labor market. And whenever at least one of these skills occurred in a job posting, it's classified as an AI job posting, or it's classified as a green job posting. And what we see is indeed that what we've maybe have seen or heard anecdotally is that both of these domains have been growing significantly. On average, the numbers, you know, the prevalence is not that high. We're talking about a prevalence of 1 to 2% of all vacancies in the labor market, but it's been growing swiftly. So it's really hard to find any other domain or segment of the labor market that's been growing, relatively speaking, so rapidly as these two domains around artificial intelligence and green jobs. What we also see is they seem to be talking much more about skills when we look at AI work and green work than compared to the rest of the labor market. So the average posting when we look at AI roles is 3 times, the amount of skills that I'm talking about is 3 times higher than for the average vacancy that we see on the labor market. And at the same time, we see in terms of wages, that's the bottom left chart, that are stark differences in terms of the median wages that are offered for these positions. So AI roles are really high paying roles. Green roles are, relatively speaking, compared to the rest of the labor market, also better paying jobs. And then you have the rest of the labor market represented here again in gray. But let's move away from skills and have a look at occupation. So we essentially looked at the 3 or 4 most common formal degrees that employers could ask for. So short degrees right after high school, so 1-year degrees, you have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and PhD degrees. And comparing these 3 domains, again, we see that there are big level differences. So for example, the AI roles are relatively education intensive. So for AI roles, usually it's more likely that employers are asking for a bachelor's degree, master's degree, or a PhD degree. Less so for green roles. Interestingly, the short-term programs are much more prevalent for green roles. It's much more about hands-on work, actually, than for the rest of the labor market, which has a significantly lower overall requirement. But there's a tendency that we already see here when we look at AI roles, and that is that the mentioning of formal degrees has been declining slightly, but significantly over the last years. And you remember the curve from back here. This is exactly the time period when the demand for these types of jobs has been increasing. And so this is the level of prevalence. But what's more interesting even is having a closer look at the premium for these types of degrees. So usually, when you look at the labor market conventionally, what you see is a so-called educational gradient. And that means that compared to no educational degree requirement, formal degree requirement, you have higher wages being offered for somebody for asking for bachelor's degree, and even higher for master's degree, and even higher for PhD. So it's this kind of smooth increasing curve. And we do see this curve here on the very left-hand side, right? So we see always the reference group is always like a position with no formal education requirements. And there is a wage premium, a degree premium, as we call it, for vocational training, for bachelor's degree, for master's degree, and significant for PhD degrees, if you look at the dark blue bar on the very left-hand side. But interestingly, if you look at green roles and AI roles, the picture looks completely different. For green roles, for example, we see that there is an additional premium to degrees in general compared to no degrees, but it's kind of flat, right? Flattened out. There's no gradient, there's no upward slope comparing the degrees from a bachelor's to a master's to PhD. And for AI roles, interestingly, we see that the curve has completely vanished. The educational gradient has completely disappeared. What this means, for example, is that at least in our statistical analysis, where we try to control for various other characteristics, like job experience, what kind of job is this? Is it in London? Is it in rural? Is it in the countryside? We see that there's no educational premium, for example, for a PhD anymore. And this is a really strong indication that skill-based hiring is indeed, taking place for AI roles, and also to some extent for green roles. Lastly, we wanted to see, like, okay, how does this evolve across occupations? So we ran these analyses for all sorts of occupations in the UK. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you the results for AI roles. Feel free to explore the paper, which is, going to be published next week, actually, and this preprint is available online. But what we did, we ran these analyses for all sorts of occupation over the last 5 years, and we followed occupations, so to say, because they differ quite a lot in terms of how tight the talent pool is, right? How narrow the talent pool is. For some of the occupations, it's becoming really thin. The demand is far exceeding supply, and for others, it's more or less balanced. But what we see is that with increasing demand, so the tighter the talent pool gets, the higher the premium for skills actually becomes. So this is kind of an indication that if the situation gets really, really tight, if demand exceeds supply by far, for these occupations and years, the premium of skills, the economic premium of skills is much higher, while for education, we observe almost the opposite. It's kind of a flat curve. There's no real strong positive, there's definitely no positive correlation between, how tight the market is in terms of how scarce talent is compared to demand for education, but there's a clear, steep increase for the premium of skills. And so in a nutshell, what we find with the evidence of AI roles and green roles is all ticking all the boxes of what you expect to see once we get to a situation of skill-based hiring. The prevalence, higher prevalence of skills, more mentioning of skills, high economic premium of skills, and less prevalent and less economically rewarding offers associated to higher degrees. But of course, money is just one part of the picture. As we all know, you might have heard of the, decreasing marginal returns on money. You can offer more money to attract more talent, but at some point you might have to offer more than just money. And there's also a demographic component to this for many, particularly younger generations. You can attract talent just up to a certain tipping point with more money, but you might also want to throw in more other rewards, other perks that, for example, encourage to have a better work-life balance in your job. And this is particularly the focus of the second paper that we looked at. So we noticed that particularly for AI roles, for example, and here we will be focusing on AI roles specifically, we noticed, of course, there is the tendency that employers are trying to attract talent by offering more money. We've already seen the premium for skills going up, but we wondered, is there more to it? Is there more in terms of non-monetary rewards to these positions? And in a nutshell, we do find that non-monetary rewards are being offered in addition to higher salary for positions centered around artificial intelligence. How do we go about this? So essentially, what we hypothesized is that AI roles are offering more perks, more benefits. I will be talking about what these benefits are, what we put in our dictionary of benefits. We hypothesized that they're offering this in addition to higher salary. So it's really, when companies reach a tipping point where they say, like, okay, so we tried our best already to attract more AI talent with more money, we have to give people even more to find the best people who have these relevant skills in the field of artificial intelligence. And we also hypothesized, similarly to the first paper, that this is particularly prevalent in domains where the demand for artificial intelligence skills is relatively high. So we grouped the perks that we could identify in job postings, and this is looking at US data, not UK data, like in the first paper. We grouped them into 6 different groups. We looked at tuition assistance, paid leave, health and well-being, parental leave, workplace culture, and remote work. So roughly speaking, you should be able to imagine what this entails. You know, it's like jobs offering compensation, paying the tuition fees, offering parental leave, whether they have dental health insurance is offered with the contract, whether they have inclusivity events at your workplace or facilities at your workplace, like a gym, for example, or obviously something that really matters a lot these days, at least since the pandemic, is whether people are allowed to work from a place different than the factory or the office is working from home, for example. And what we see is there are different levels in the prevalence of these perks. So some perks on average are more prevalent than others. So for example, what we see here is that on average, workplace culture is generally more prevalent than parental leave, for example. But what we also see when comparing AI roles and non-AI roles is that there are sometimes very stark differences between the non-AI roles, kind of the conventional labor market or the rest of the labor market, and positions centered around artificial intelligence. So for example, particularly for remote work, we clearly see that AI roles, just at a very descriptive level for now, are much more likely to offer the perk of remote work than the rest of the labor market. And when we look at this more dynamically over time, we see that this has also changed over the last year. So going along our time series from 2018 to 2024, the dotted line essentially means there's even chance. You know, it's as likely for an AI role to offer this perk as compared to any other position on the labor market. But what we see that over time things have changed quite significantly. So for example, for remote work, which I think is a very interesting and I guess intuitively also probably a perk that makes sense to a lot of people, is of interest to many people. We've seen that how this moved from more or less parity, so like equal chances of being offered remote work, to something that is much more prevalent for AI roles. So it's up to 20% more likely to see an offer for remote working conditions with an AI position than with the rest of the labor market. We see similar trends for workplace culture and for parental leave, which is also very interesting perk if you think about this. We'll talk about this a bit more in a second. This is descriptive. We also ran a regression analysis, like a more refined statistical analysis on this, because of course, the prevalence of certain perks could depend on many things, right? If you think about remote work, for example, just the type of occupation that you're in might make it more likely for your employer to simply offer remote work because there are certain characteristics that bind you to, you have to be in the office while you might be more flexible working from home. And we ran a regression analysis where we tried to control for many of these characteristics, the educational requirements for this position, the type of industry, is this blue collar, is this white collar jobs, the seniority level, because also in terms of seniority level, these perks might be differently distributed. And still, for some of these categories, namely for these two, parental leave, workplace culture, and remote work, we still see that the findings are significant, so that the odds that you find these perks in an AI position, so whether this dummy essentially says it's an AI role, yes or no, are significantly higher than, for example, for other perks, so that the benchline would suggest here. What we also see is, though, that once we start refining our model, so once we start adding more and more controls that might also explain the prevalence, the coefficients go down. They drop significantly for some, but not so much for others, particularly if you control for salary. So this is an indication for our second hypothesis, in favor of our second hypothesis, that this is probably done in addition to salary. So once you start controlling for salary in our model, it becomes less likely to for AI roles to have this particular impact. And we wanted to have a closer look at this, like what's the role of salary? So essentially, on simple words, is it that these perks are just offered randomly, irrespectively of whether this is a well-paid position or not? Or is it that particularly the well-paid positions are those that also in AI also offer these perks? And we done an analysis where we compared the non-AI roles and the AI roles and looked at the wage distribution of these positions. What I'm highlighting here is parental leave, because the findings for parental leave are pretty interesting. And also parental leave is a very interesting perk if you think about this strategically, because of course, we still have a huge gender gap, for example, in AI roles. And it's I think it's fair to argue that much of this has to do with the provision on the lack of the provision of adequate childcare to some extent. But what we see here is, first of all, for the non-AI roles, the wages are significantly lower than for the AI roles, right? The gray lines also over time increase slightly, wages in general increase slightly in that time period, but significantly lower than for the AI roles. For the AI roles, we see a strong increase in wages, in annual average wages. But what's interesting is we make this separation between the solid line and the dotted line. The solid line is referring to the positions that offer this specific perk. In this case, it's parental leave. And the dotted line are those where the perk is not being offered. And here we see that particularly towards the end of the time period, we see this spread, right? So the wages for AI roles offering a perk are significantly higher, at least statistically speaking, than for the AI positions where the perk's not being offered. And this is one of the indications from our point of view that it's kind of this phenomenon that employers are offering higher wages and still, in order to attract more talent, they're offering an additional perk, like it's the case for parental leave. We see similar, we make similar observations for health and well-being, for example, and for workplace culture. We've also been running this in a regression model. I spare you the details on this, but what we see for these three roles in particular is that this tendency is even amplified once we regard whether we're looking at an occupation in a specific point in time where the market has been particularly tight. So similar to the first paper, to the green and the AI roles, we see that for occupations where the talent pool is particularly thin compared to the many open positions that we have in the labor market, the perk premium, if you want to call it like this, or the prevalence of perks for AI roles, for these three perks in particular, these three benefits, is particularly strong. For the last work, I'd like to move away from AI skills, but the impact that AI has on other types of skills in the labor market. And I would like to, try and think about the aha moment that probably many of you had when working with artificial intelligence. So I remember my aha moment when working with technologies like ChatGPT, for example, or other models, was when I've been preparing my classes here for students, master students at the OII, in a class called computational methods. So it's about web scraping, for example, scraping information, extracting information from web pages, a BBC Sports page, for example. And out of curiosity, I asked one of these large language models to write computer code for me and say, hey, could you write web scraper for me, And frankly speaking, I was very amazed, I thought like, okay, wow, this program is writing code that I would have, needed at least a day to write a script like this on a computer, that this in a few minutes. And for many people, this is associated with a common widespread fear that they will be substituted by this technology. They think like, okay, now that the technology is able to do, all these tasks and it has the skills that are essential to my work, it will probably be taking over my job. Though there's a counter narrative to that, and that's essentially centered around the idea that there might be some tasks or some skills that are now automated by artificial intelligence and by these large language models, for example. But now this frees up a lot of time for your complementary skills to kick in. So for all the other skills where the technology is not that great in yet, maybe to compete with you, in my case, it would be, interacting with my students, group exercises, teamwork, for example. So all the skills where the computer, the machine, the AI doesn't have an edge, and I'd be liberated of these, rather repetitive tasks of writing computer code. And that's essentially the question of this third paper. So is it really rather that with the rise of large language models, for example, we see an increase in the demand for complementary roles or for complementary skills, for skills that are that work very well, human skills that work very well together with the machine, or is it that more of the tasks that these machines that AI models are good in will be substituted on the labor market? And we had a look at job postings from the United States, and a bunch of these so-called human skills, or what we think are complementary skills. This is based on a selection of policy papers and research papers where other scholars had identified skills of which they think they would be complementary to AI technology. So teamwork, for example, also digital literacy, resilience, agility, or analytical thinking, for example. And what we hypothesized were essentially two effects. One is internal effect, and one is an external effect. The internal effect could be described by looking at somebody who's really in the middle of this AI development. Those are data scientists, so people sifting through large amounts of data, trying to generate knowledge for companies, for example, in e-commerce, from online generated data, for example. And the argument goes that now that we have a new mode of AI models, a new breed of AI models, deep learning models, for example, that come to decisions in a more or less opaque way. These deep learning models, many engineers really don't understand how the model had come to a certain decision in the end. This means that for AI workers, so inside of AI professions, they need to have better understanding of ethical implications that come with these types of AI augmented decision making. On the external side, though, we think that also people outside of the AI domain, so people that are not necessarily working immediately together, designing or maintaining artificial intelligence algorithms, are also demanded to, for example, critically question AI recommendations in an HR department, if you want to bring up this example. So the data scientists might be bringing in recommendations on who to hire next based on AI models, but still the HR team needs to know, like, okay, how did the computer, how did the AI get to this decision? And or similarly, on a regional level, the regional spillovers would be that in areas where AI technologies like self-driving cars have become more prevalent, authorities need to have a certain understanding or critically question or be informed about the functionalities of these AI models. So we have these two effects, the internal and the external effects of artificial intelligence. Let's have a look at the internal effects first. So what we did is essentially we sift through job vacancies again, and we try to find out whether certain types of AI skills are more prevalent, complementary skills are more prevalent among AI roles compared to the rest of the labor market. Again, this can be read in a similar fashion than the chart that I showed you earlier. Everything here at the level of 1 essentially means it's as likely to observe a certain human skill for an AI role compared to the rest of the labor market. And what we see is there are significant level differences, right? So it's much more likely, for example, to observe analytical thinking or technical proficiency in an AI role compared to the rest of the labor market. I also give you the percentage numbers here. So this is like 16% of all AI roles, in contrast to 6% of all other roles in the labor market, are demanding technical skills centered around technical proficiency. We also see a spike of this over here. But interestingly, we also see skills where you might not have at first assumed them to be more prevalent among AI roles, like resilience and agility, to be also twice as likely to occur in AI roles compared to non-AI roles. There are skills that are centered around the level of 1. Ethics skills, for example, I think is a very interesting example because, of course, the more industries, occupations, various sorts of industries and occupations are dealing with AI technologies, be it directly or indirectly, ethics skills centered around the ethic assessment, the ethical considerations around artificial intelligence become more and more relevant. And we see this in our data. Starting from a relatively low level about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we're moving to almost parity, and the numbers are really high, right? This at least shows you we might just have reached a level, where it's equally likely to see ethics skills in an AI role compared to the rest of the labor market, but still 1/3 of all AI positions require ethics skills, and that's I guess in itself, regardless of the ratio that we're showing here, is already a message. We also looked at, I mentioned data scientists earlier, at specific roles, specific AI roles, and we had a closer look at the data scientists, for example, and we tried to run a parsimonious model, where we tried to control for various other characteristics, as I mentioned earlier to you, and wanted to see like, okay, is it more likely for this specific role to ask for certain skills? And we do see that for the majorities of these skills, but for ethics, interestingly, that they are much more likely to be demanded for data science professions. Interestingly, though, we also looked at salary. And for salary, the picture is a bit more blurred, is a bit more diverse. I'll highlight, in the interest of time, I'll highlight one finding, though. While ethics skills are not necessarily more prevalent among data scientists, controlling for many other characteristics that could influence salary, we see that there seems to be a salary premium for certain ethics skills among data scientists. And while this is maybe seemingly, a puzzle at first, it could be actually a matter of scarcity. So ethics skills are not yet that prevalent among data science roles, but if a certain data science position is asked to also have ethics skills, is really important, which is reflected in a salary premium of around 10%. So it's 10% more valuable in terms of salary for data scientists to also have ethics skills. Maybe to come to a conclusion on this work, we also had a look at the external effects, as I said, and just to highlight this again, whatever I'm showing you next is not looking at AI roles, right? It's looking at the overall labor market, excluding all AI roles. So AI roles we know is around 1 to 2, depending on the industry, like maybe 3 or 4% of each occupation. And we looked at the rest. We looked at all the rest of the labor market. And what we show is that the more AI penetrates these certain occupations, which are the little dots that we're showing here, the higher the share of complementary skills that are being demanded outside of AI roles. So every dot is representing, like what we're representing is the share of complementary skills outside of AI roles, so really non-AI positions. And similarly, interestingly, not so much, but still there's a negative tendency. We see that there seems to be a negative effect for substitution. So we seem to observe both a positive complementary and a negative substitution effect. And that essentially means that there seems to be an external effect on artificial intelligence has on skills. And that is, the more AI penetrates an occupation, the higher the demand outside of AI roles for complementary skills, and the lower the demand for certain substitutable skills. In order to make this a bit more robust, we also ran this analysis not only across occupations, industries, and regions, but also for the United Kingdom and for Australia, because this has been US data so far. And the results are pretty much the same. They get a bit messy when we look at regions, which is probably a data problem because regions are not that easily identifiable. In the US, the data quality is really good, and we also managed to identify, and we see a similar trend. But looking at occupational and industry spillovers, as I try to illustrate it with the example of authorities, regulating cars or HR managers, we see a clear tendency that there is a strong positive complementary effect and a slightly weaker negative substitution effect the more AI is entering industries and occupations. We also try to scale this up and did a little bit of calculation. So which of the two effects is larger, essentially. And we see that the complementary effect is significantly larger, almost twice as large on average. Those are US occupations, than the substitution effect. It might not seem so on this scale because it's a logarithmic scale, so it's really sketched. But we see that, for example, for business and financial operations, it's there 45% more demand because of these increase in complementary roles than the decrease in substitute roles. So essentially, coming back to our initial assumption, we do see both internal and external effects in terms of the demand for complementary skills and substitutable skills, though the complementary effects that artificial intelligence has on the labor market seem to be significantly larger than the substitute effect. Maybe I have still 1 or 2 minutes left. Oh, we started at 1:15. Right? Yeah. Okay, so I think we've got time still. Yeah. Of course, as you can imagine, we talked to many policy makers and engaged in loads of roundtables and had the fortunate opportunity to also contribute to some of the policy ideas, policy papers on this. I'd like to highlight 2 of the many ideas that we've been discussing or are still discussing with policymakers. And they essentially stem from the growing relevance of individual skills. So what we clearly see, be it in the field of artificial intelligence or in the field of sustainable jobs, is that individual skills have become more important. And we've already seen a situation where the labor market's been really tight, and where, you know, there are just not enough people that have been, in terms of formal degrees, been skilled to or trained to do certain jobs. So let's take the OII, for example. We're a proud front runner in, you know, teaching social data science, for example. But please correct me if I'm wrong, this is the 5th cohort or 6th cohort of social data science masters.
More than that.
It's more than that.
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah, we started earlier.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, okay. Still, nonetheless, you know, it's really a relatively recent phenomenon. You know, it's not that there are tens of thousands of graduates in AI and machine learning on the labor market, but still there are people who have certain skills, and often people had taught or have learned these skills in other ways. They've learned these skills in, you know, self-directed learning at home, online. We know this from other studies, for example, from colleagues done here by my colleague Billy Ledonvet and Manoush Magarian from Denmark, where they looked at where people learn skills other than in universities and schools, and they learn them online tutorials, they learn them in an entrepreneurial way, they learn them on the fly on the job, for example. And the thing is that the labor market kind of provides these skills, but not everywhere. So big companies, for example, like Google, have already, you know, heard the call, and they are providing. They made learning part of working. So they realized that the workplace is also a place to learn skills, and that's why they're, you know, bringing in extra money and extra resources for people to be trained new skills on the job. So they get like an extra 10 to 20% of their work time, depending which Google office you work in the world, of their work time is learning time, where people are encouraged and also, you know, subsidized and supported in learning new skills, whatever skills they think are most relevant for their work environment. Though, of course, companies like Google can afford this. They have the resources. They also have the in-house knowledge to provide these skills. But many other companies, you remember the initial figure, you know, 2/3 of the small and medium-sized enterprises apparently can't, because they're severely, you know, lacking the talent, looking for talent. And this might be one of the ideas where organizations, governmental organizations, for example, could come in and support these you know, organizations that don't have the in-house capacities to help their people, help also these organizations, smaller businesses, to make learning part of working and support learning skills on the job. The other one is, if people you know, learn these skills at home, for example, autodidactically, there might be still a gap between these workers and employers in terms of how are these skills accredited. So people have the skills, but it's hard for them to show that they have the skills, credibly show in an interview, for example, that they have the skills, or in an application. And one idea would be to start centers that accredit these types of skills. So if you think of English, what we do for languages, for example, it's very common, I mean, it's essential for all students, at least studying in our programs, to have some kind of a TOEFL test or similar to show their proficiency in English. And it doesn't really matter whether they learn English at home or school or with their aunt and uncle, as long as they got a certain score on this certificate in this test. And we've been thinking about introducing something similar for certain skills that are in demand in the labor market right now. So to kind of bridge the gap between the maybe informal and unconventional ways that people learn their skills to what the workers, so what employers are actually asking for in terms of credits on the labor market. I don't know if we have time to talk a lot about the outlook. We will be looking at the supply side soon with a set of surveys in the UK and in the US, because this so far, as I outlined here, has been looking exclusively at the demand side. But we're of course very, very interested in what workers actually have to say about this. So addressing questions like, okay, is it that you'd like to learn more AI skills? And if so, what's preventing you or encouraging you in doing so? Why is there still such a big gap between men and women in terms of the prevalence of working with AI technologies like ChatGPT, for example? Are there systemic, you know, barriers to this? Is this because of pre-selection into certain jobs? And those are many of the some of the many questions that we'd like to address with the with our survey. We still don't have a name yet, so maybe afterwards in the Q&A session you could like give us your take on whether we call it sales, trail, or race. Those are just 3 ideas that are circulating right now. I'll stop right here. If you want to know more about our project, it's SkillScale .org, you find a little micro-documentary that we had the pleasure of doing with Oxford Sparks. Well, gosh, it's 2 years ago already when we started our project. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right there in the back. I don't know. How does it work with the microphone? We have to.
We don't have a microphone, just have to speak nice and loud.
Okay, yeah, then it works. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm actually studying AI for business at Said Business School, and one thing that really caught my curiosity was, do you also have some data available on students with maybe different backgrounds doing in AI roles? Like, how are they performing now? So somebody comes from a humanities background, somebody from a computer science background, and how is it that they are faring now in their respective jobs? Because a lot of them are now taking up AI roles very actively, whether or not they have had a coding background or a
Yeah.
computer science background. So if there is some sort of observation there.
So your question relates particularly to students, you say, or the labor force in general?
Or the labor force in general.
So in our survey, what we plan to cover is a set of questions that might allow us to shed some light on the questions that I have, that I think you have, if you allow me this interpretation, which is essentially, is there, so do people in working with artificial intelligence, do they benefit maybe from their background? So is it that people in STEM fields are doing better, seeing less barriers in working with AI than, let's say, from the humanities, for example? So we should be able to shed some light on this, because we will be asking about their background, what they've been doing, their education, where they're coming from, and how frequently they use these technologies. Let's say how frequently they use prompt engineering for their work, and how confident they feel with this. Yeah. The only caveat is you might have to wait for a few months until we've gathered the data. But yes, I guess we might be able to address this. Yeah. Please.
I have a lot of questions, but thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
The first question I have is, how did you identify AI and green roles to be the fields where the skill gap is the widest?
Yeah. So we use the so-called Stanford definition. So our colleagues like Eric Bringolfsson, for example, they've been doing this, and there are many ways to do this. This is just one way, maybe the most straightforward way. Once a posting contained at least one of the skills that fall into a certain domain, we classify this posting as an AI posting.
Right, but did you do like a did you collect all the postings anyway and then decide that AI and green?
Yes. So we have a more or less random representation of all the postings that there are for a certain year and country or occupation, and then we classify them accordingly.
Yeah, but my question is like, so how did you decide that those two fields specifically are where the skill gaps are the widest?
Oh yeah, so that's not based on a statistical analysis. It's just like we know that, we know anecdotally that the demand is outpacing supply by far. So for example, like one of the numbers that I remember in the EU in the next 10 years to fill all the vacancies that are projected for green roles, the labor force in this field needs to double actually. So it's really a tremendous gap. Of course, there might be other domains, probably maybe in healthcare, I could imagine, where skill gaps are also big. But yeah, there's no precise statistical analysis prior to this.
And then I have two more questions.
Sure.
So how did you get your data from on the online job portals? Was it through some kind of API or was it scraping?
No, we collaborated with a big data provider this field.
Right.
Yeah. And they are structurally, via APIs or web scraping, have been extracting this over many years.
Is it open source?
No.
I see. And then the final question is, I wanted to ask about the difference between the perception of substitute skills and complementary skills, because I feel like the substitute skills often make or break an application, but the complementary skills often don't. I don't know if I understood this skill categorization correctly, but I feel like the substitute skills are the technical ones, AI related technical skills. And then the complementary skills are sort of the human skills.
So it's the substitutable skills. That's a really good point. Yeah, I didn't elaborate very long on this. So we have in the same way that we gathered the list of complementary skills, of human skills as we call it, we also looked at the substitutable side. And to give an example, basic translation work, basic data summarization work, text summarization. Those are all the skills that we think, or that other scholars had assumed might be substitutable to recent AI technologies. Yeah, so it's not necessarily really that technical. It's more very, data clerical skills, like relatively simple administrative skills, for example.
Right. Yeah, but I just feel like it might not be fair to plot them on the same graph, because I feel like they're weighted differently in an application. But it's just personally what I thought about that. So
yeah, I mean, this alludes to one of the issues, of course, in terms of the data that we're dealing with. So we should be transparent about this. A good point. This is demand side. So these are job vacancies. This is just what companies put in a job announcement. It doesn't really mean that they're exactly looking for these skills actually on the job that's supposed to be done. Just like they can ask for a lot of things. Some of them might not be actually done in the work afterwards. And also information like the salary. It's just the offer that they make. There might be a lot of wishful thinking involved in this. Maybe a candidate like this doesn't really exist, and they have to downgrade the skill requirements afterwards. That we don't know. So we don't really know if the skills that have been demanded or the salary that have been offered is actually the salary or the skills that have been applied later on.
Thank you. Got a couple of online questions.
Yes,
we'll
of
take
course.
One of those and then
and then we had two years
yeah,
to the back. Yeah.
So a couple of compliments as well. People saying great talk, well done. Kai says, could you say more on the methods and market segmentation that you'll use to reach the supply side?
For the supply side, for the survey that will be doing, or is it demand or supply side?
Doesn't say.
To reach the supply side. So yeah, so we will be collaborating with. The initial plan is to do this survey in the UK and in the US. I don't know who am I speaking to? Probably the people are listening up there, right? And so it will be the UK and the US, and we collaborate with a large online survey provider that are ensuring us to have a representative coverage of the workforce in both countries. So 2,000 individuals in both countries that we're looking at for this first round of the survey right now. Yeah, and so they should be, should be covering the entire labor market. Of course, some every occupational industry should be in there actually in the end. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And of course, but do you want to take another?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would go back again to the beginning where you said you are looking for AI and green jobs and all the others. Are all the others also kind of classified, or do you, by classifying the jobs, only focus, okay, we classify AI and green jobs and everything else?
And the rest. Yeah. So it's all the postings that we have, minus the blue ones and the green ones. It's the gray ones.
Mm-hmm. But when you do like kind of this, I would assume there could then of course be other jobs and skills outperforming AI and green, right? But because you throw them in the bucket with all the others, right? You do not measure the effects of other categories. Of course, it's logical to do the theory about, okay, AI and green skills are needed. Yeah. But if you throw everything in this large bucket, and then maybe you do not see maybe other interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of it's a bit a situation of searching for the needle in the haystack, because there might be some other fields where for example, skill intensity is high as well. We did some preliminary analysis, or in the process of doing this, we did look at other fields like financial services, for example, and looked at how they behave. And of course, it's a very thick gray line, if you want to call it like this. There are a lot of jobs in this field, but that was really not so much our point. So we're not saying that there might be skill-based hiring going on in other domains of the labor market as well. That could well be like healthcare. I think so. For example, we know that this happened in healthcare during the pandemic. That's a well studied field. We had an extreme demand for healthcare professionals for obvious reasons, and not so many people that had formal degrees in these domains. And so healthcare providers focused more on skills. They've pushed. You would see the same results that I showed here. It might be happening still for other domains right now, but we were really exclusively interested in AI. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in this regard, of course, you're then focusing on the hiring databases, right? But of course, I mean, you could make a different maybe observation. For example, I would assume there's also a big upskill in kind of the craftsmanship and do-it-yourself work, right? And that is, of course, not covered by kind of the job postings, but people like here, right, when you're living outside, finding a plumber or something else is like hard, and the people skilling up themselves to do the work, right? And I think that would maybe be also an interesting layer. I don't know if you could tackle that by the survey, but yeah, I mean, there are some other demands and skills, not only represented in jobs, right? Because the companies do not find the people maybe, and then anyways, the people would skill up themselves.
So absolutely. I mean, one of the things and that's why we want to look at the supply side now, because the demand side the data comes with certain obvious limitations. You know, it's really just what companies are putting on there. We don't know if this is really going to end up in the actual job afterwards. But in our supply side survey, we will be looking at that. We will also be looking at where people acquired their skills, whether they did this do it yourself, whether they learned, you know, prompt engineering on YouTube, to be really precise, or whether they went to a Coursera, an online course, or whether they went to a wonderful degree like the social data science program here.
Or you maybe could also look into freelance databases, or I think here you have Gumtree, right? There's also like, I guess, ask and need.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, are here plumbers around the corner, right? I mean, that it would be the demand side, not by the companies, but by the society.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of, these portals would still be a good representation probably of the supply side, because it's really individuals, regardless of where they learned their skills, offering their services. Yeah, that's a good point.
Oh, sorry. Maybe another one through and then one last one.
Yeah.
I was just curious, for your slide about data science with ethics skills can earn 10% more. Is that in the US or the UK?
That's the US.
The US. Okay.
Yeah.
Was the data different for the UK?
I don't know. We could check.
Okay.
So we essentially ran the what we did, the last part of the analysis, where we looked at the external effects. We ran this across countries. We could check. I'm happy to check.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
Well, two questions about the perks. One is about remote work. Did you include also hybrid work?
Yes, both of them are in there. So we, in the paper, we also somewhere hidden in the appendix, as it is usually the case, we also separate between the two, because the skills that were not really skills. It's like buckets of skills. So workplace culture, for example, contains various perks. Contains various perks, and the remote work contains both hybrid work and also fully remote options. Yeah.
Question online here. Again, people are really interested, I think, in the data sources that you're using and what they can do and what they can't do. So first of all, the factual question, whom are these job postings directed at? Are they primarily for individuals within the country where they're advertised, or are these advertised internationally effectively?
I mean, I guess everybody could access them, but so they're publicly available.
They're publicly available.
Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, of course, probably a job advertisement for a company in Ohio, people from Sheffield in the UK will probably not be applying for that, but they could see it. Yeah.
And then relatedly, you've mentioned a couple of limitations of this data already. Are there any other things you sort of, you'd flag that you would really want to see in this that's just not there?
Yeah, I'd love to see more wage information. So the reason why, for example, I would have loved to run this analysis for many other European countries, particularly the first one, because we know that the gap, the skill gap, particularly when it comes to restoration and green skills in countries like Germany, for example, is more severe than it is for the UK. So there you really, to use your words, you really have a hard time finding a plumber or anybody else, a handyman doing this type of work. The problem is, maybe Germans in particular don't like to talk about money. So the thing is, those job advertisements in Germany, for example, also in France and Italy, only like 5 to 10% contain wage information, while in the UK it's 40% and up to 60% in the US, which obviously limits your scope for doing this kind of regression analysis where you try to explain wages with certain characteristics. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I fear we need to bring this to an end because it's 6:15, but obviously I don't know if you can hang around and answer any
Yeah,
other
yeah,
questions
sure.
people have for a few
I'll
more
be here
minutes.
for a few more minutes.
Amazing. But if we can just really thank Fabian, it's such a fascinating presentation. So much data. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.